Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, what's today? It's Monday. It's Monday, March 5th, 2018. And, well, I don't know. It's Monday again. Greg Dworkin will not be with us this morning. It's a very busy season for Greg, unfortunately. Unfortunately for all the rest of us, and probably for him, too. He's probably jumping out of his skin wanting to share the stories of the weekend with you, which would be a great thing because, I don't know, did anything happen? Did anybody see anything? I don't know. I was a little busy over the weekend, but we'll catch up. Don't worry. Donald Trump already on a tear this morning. Nothing, I don't know, earth-shattering about what he's tweeting about this morning. He's watching TV and tweeting the television shows. That's nice. It's good. It's, our biggest problem so far has been Mrs. Trump, his mother. I guess at some point let the television babysit him as a kid, and we've never really recovered from that. But I don't know. Hopefully we can deal with this over the weekend. Let's see. We're in the initial stages of what may turn out to be a major global trade war, which is not as disruptive as major global actual wars usually. But, well, these days with interdependence being what it is, economic interdependence, can't really tell where the whole thing will shake out. But I did notice over the weekend that, I haven't seen Carl Icahn arrested yet, and that seems unusual. It seems to me like perhaps someone ought to be paying attention to this, and hopefully there'll be. I think New York State is actually rather adept at bringing insider trading charges on a state level so that they wouldn't be pardoned. Normally, of course, we would see the SEC bring federal charges, but apparently I'll have to dig this story up. Speaking of the trade war, I don't know exactly what set it off, and I probably have an article here somewhere that will tell us, but at some point, Trump got restless and tweeted out the start of a trade war to begin with steel and aluminum import tariffs. This ostensibly aimed at China, which he hates but also loves, and we'll talk a little bit about that, I guess this morning. But in advance of this announcement of these steel and aluminum tariffs, which of course will, raise prices for a lot of things across the board, but okay, we do things once in a while that if they're in our national interest, I don't know that this one is, but sometimes prices get raised. It's not the end-all, be-all consumer prices. I'm not a Republican, after all, although I am concerned about the price of some of these things, including, cars and some consumer durable goods, but also canned, they made a big deal over the weekend. I did see this. Canned beer, canned soup, canned anything that, the prices of which will increase, allegedly, although who knows whether they pass any of these things on. Maybe we'll all get $1,000 bonuses from our tax cuts. But I did notice this story, and here's one that I put away from Think Progress. Judd Legum, having noticed this. Who reported this story? It's usually, Well, did he dig it out himself? That's a good question. Usually, when there is credit due elsewhere, you'll see the links here. I don't know. We'll read the story. Billionaire investor and longtime Trump confidant Carl Icahn, and I'm not sure if that's how he pronounces his name, dumped $31.3 million of stock in a company heavily dependent on steel last week, just days before Trump announced plans to impose steep tariffs on steel imports. I don't know whether he thought he was lashing out at Christopher Steele or whether he understands exactly what he was doing, but he did go ahead and do it. In a little-noticed SEC filing submitted on February 22nd, 2018, Icahn disclosed that he systematically sold off nearly 1 million shares of, Manitowoc, I'm guessing. I'm sure I've mangled that pronunciation. Company Incorporated. This is, or maybe Manitowoc. I don't know. People there can tell me. It's a leading global manufacturer of cranes and lifting solutions. I love the business terminology. We we got to have a solution in there in order to have enough industry buzzwords. It's not not a buzzword in our industry. It's an industry buzzword in other industries, ones that are doing better. Got to graft the word solutions onto this. Well, cranes, construction cranes and the like, are lifting solutions. I think that's very clever. Anyway, they are therefore heavily dependent on steel to make their products. The filing came just 7 days before a White House event where Trump announced his intention to impose a 25% tariff on steel imports, and it's a pretty big tariff. Trump's announcement rattled the markets, with steel-dependent stocks hardest hit. Manitowoc, however they might say that, the stock plunged, losing 6% of its value. Reuters attributed the drop to the fact that they are, of course, a major consumer of steel. As of 10:20 a.m. Friday, the stock had lost an additional 6%, trading at $26.21. I'll take their word for it on that. Icahn was required to make the disclosure because of the large volume of his sale. The filing reveals that he began systematically selling stock on February 12th, when he was able to sell the stock for $32 to $34 a share. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross publicly released a report on February 16th calling for a 24% tariff. 24, you see, and Trump one-upped them with a 25% tariff. But as the chart in the SEC filing indicates, Icahn started selling his stock on February 12th, prior to the public release of that report. Moreover, the sharp drop in steel-related stocks did not occur until Trump announced he would accept the Commerce Department's recommendations. Before February, Icahn was not actively trading this stock, the Manitowoc. According to regulatory filings, he did not buy or sell any shares of it. Between January 17th, 2015 and February 11th, 2018. The February 22nd filing was required because his ownership stake dropped below 5%. Now that he owns less than 5% of the company, he's not required to make another disclosure about his holdings until May. So while the latest filing shows him still retaining some stock in this company, Icahn could have continued selling the stock. We're not even sure. If Manitowoc is not listed on the eventual May filing, called a Schedule 13F, that would mean he has liquidated all his holdings. Well, that would be interesting. Icahn, a billionaire investor with far-flung holdings, is a close associate of Trump's. Trump, of course, invoked Icahn's name repeatedly on the campaign trail. Once in office, Trump installed him as a special advisor, although Icahn did not unwind his business entanglements before accepting the position. That sounds familiar. Icahn resigned in August. That also sounds familiar. In advance of a New Yorker article which detailed how he used his position in the White House and his connection to Trump to protect his investments. So it's not like he's not inclined to this sort of thing. Let's see. An excerpt from the New Yorker article. One day in August 2016, the financier Carl Icahn made an urgent phone call to the Environmental Protection Agency. Icahn is one of the richest men on Wall Street, and he has thrived in no small measure because of a capacity to intimidate. A Texas-based oil refiner in which he had a major stake was losing money because of an obscure environmental rule that Icahn regarded as unduly onerous. Sure, why not? Gets in the way of my money. Icahn is a voluble critic of any government regulation that constrains his companies. No surprise there. So he wanted to speak with the person in charge of enforcing the policy, a senior official at the EPA named Janet McCabe. In his resignation letter, Icahn acknowledged discussing regulation of the refining industry with Trump, though he denied seeking to benefit any of his specific holdings. Icahn claimed that despite being named an advisor, he, quote, had no duties whatsoever. So it's a no-show job. Gotcha. That's supposed to get me off the hook. In an interview on CNBC on Thursday, Icahn appeared to acknowledge at least occasional ongoing conversations with Trump, saying the two had not had much interaction. In the last 4 to 5 months, the White House and a representative for Icahn did not respond immediately for a request for comment. Not surprising there. And I'm sure somewhere Martha Stewart is bouncing off the walls, wondering why she gets busted on insider trading and Carl Icahn doesn't. And probably the answer is Donald Trump is friends with him, and also He's much, much, much richer than you. Okay, so that's, I guess, a good start for the day. We're on. I don't know if you noticed, but for the past 10 minutes or so, Daily Kos Radio has been live. Something I neglected to tell you, though Bill did tell you via Twitter that Daily Kos Radio was live today. And let's see what's up for this morning's agenda. Let's see. We'll kick off the week. Bill claims, I don't know if he really knows this, by informing you that sadly you did not win an Oscar last night. I assume that most of you listening did not win Oscars last night, but there's always the possibility that one of you out there was an Oscar winner. And if that's the case, well, call right in. We'll interview about you. I won't know anything to ask you. I didn't see any of the movies, nor did I see the Oscar broadcast. But I did see all of you watching the Oscar broadcast. But this time I watched even less closely than before. I usually don't anyway, as you know, and I don't get to see the movies. Let's see. I did see Black Panther. That was good, but that's not up until, I guess, next year. And I don't know. What else did I see? I think that was about it. So that's the year in movies for me. Okay. Well, let's see. You didn't win an Oscar, but I was rooting for you. You can be sure of that. That's true. Thanks very much, Bill, for starting us off with that. I have to check in here. What's going on here? Pastor Dan has got something happening, and I'm not 100% sure what, and I got to scroll back, but he copied me on this one. All right, let's see. Pastor Dan says he's got a call at 7:40 a.m. this morning from the school principal. There's been a threat of a shooting at our kids' high school. Dan and I do not have any kids together. It's Dan's children who we're talking about here. Class starts at 8 o'clock. That'd be the time to phone in the threat if you don't want to go. Obviously, you're going to want to look first at anybody with major exams in class today. Sadly, that's typically where you'll find the perpetrators of phone-in threats. If they at least the ones that turn out not to be valid. But we had plenty of news on that front over the weekend as well. The NRA out in force to try and beat down the high school kids from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. I'm getting there. And I did see a lot of people talking this morning about Dana Loesch has some kind of new program of sorts that they're launching on what purports to be NRA TV. And it's another America is a hellhole video, which, like I said this morning on Twitter, I liked them better when they used to film them in the caves in Afghanistan. I thought the background was much more interesting and eye-catching. But they've decided to produce these things domestically now, which I suppose is good for jobs here in America. And I don't know, though we have our ideological differences. Now, I'd, of course, rather that they were not producing these things at all. But no surprise, they're coming out with a major counteroffensive, which likely means that they feel like they are up against the wall. So great job, those of you in Parkland and elsewhere around the country, leading us forward and keeping us organized. This is we're not the first day of March, but we're now into the month of March, during which we are told to expect some rather large-scale demonstrations on the gun issue as well. And so we'll see them, I think, all around the country, likely, and in D.C. as well. Scott Anderson texting me behind the scenes that my kid's high school is on lockdown with the shooter threat called in. Is it lockdown day? I tell you, one of the missed opportunities so far, and I guess the opportunity is still there, and it's fresh again, I guess, thanks to Parkland High School's, not Parkland High School, the high school in Parkland, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. It's too long. And are people beginning to call it MSD yet? Is that allowed? Is that disrespectful in some way? Anyway, I used to say we needed a lockdown nation hashtag because that's something you can do every day too. Every day, literally, I think, literally every day there's a lockdown somewhere. Some of them are dumber than others. I think overreactions in some cases. And sometimes they're lockdowns that the kids don't even notice. They say, well, you're in lockdown, but the kids weren't due to go outside anywhere anyway. So don't let them go. It's 2 p.m. It's not time for anybody to be leaving, but we'll call it a lockdown. We see these things occasionally. If there is an armed robbery in the neighborhood, well, the armed robber could be running around outside with a gun. So we're going to put the schools in lockdown out of an abundance of caution. But of course, Lockdown Nation as a hashtag would also reveal pretty quickly just how frequently our school children are considered to be in danger thanks to, and I think largely, almost exclusively to gun violence. They very rarely, for instance, say, oh, there goes a painter with some ladders on his truck. Trucks themselves, of course, obviously very dangerous, just like guns. Ladders, a favorite pet peeve of the gun crowd. Nobody paying enough attention to ladder deaths, if you ask the gun crowd. And imagine a painter's truck rolling by, and a elementary school just sitting there minding its own business, educating the children inside. When ladders, trucks, etc., are flying by, I'd put them in lockdown too. Let's see. Wow. Man, there's a lot on the gun front too, as a matter of fact. This sort of struck me. I don't know. We'll do a random sort of a show today, I'm sure, though probably a wiser course would be to check in with the abbreviated pundit roundup that Greg left for us. Despite the fact that he had to make it to work early, he was able to prepare the abbreviated pundit roundup even earlier, so we at least have that for a basis in our news for the day. But I know I put aside last night in rounding up, trying to catch up on Gun Fail with the idea in mind that I can restart the series in real time. And I hit upon a story that was surprising because it kind of got buried. And I noticed something, actually, in putting together Gun Fail stories. This does tend to happen. Well, let's see. First of all, I'll explain. When I fall way, way behind on collecting my Gun Fail stories, I rely very often, and this is a good reference for all of you, on the Gun Violence Archive, which exists, and you can find it online at gunviolencearchive.org. You might have guessed that it was .org. Gun Violence Archive doesn't sound like a .com, really, does it? Or a .edu. It could be a .mil, but that's not gun violence. That's state-sponsored projection of power, and there you go. Totally different. Gunviolencearchive.org, because it's so serious, compiles all sorts of categorically sorted news stories that they cull from the web. And I think it's mostly automated with a little bit of a light touch of follow-up editing later on. It's a very good resource. I find that they don't catch as many gun fail instances as I tend to catch when I'm able to comb through the stories live. But, however, they do also occasionally double count some stories too. That's also a problem. But I don't know that they consider the same categories. They do count things like when people accidentally fire their guns and don't hit anybody. And occasionally they count stories like I do of people who leave their guns behind someplace. It's unclear what their criteria are. And because it's automated, it's a little looser. And sometimes they include in their accidental shootings or unintentional shootings category things that are quite obviously intentional if you actually read the story closely. So you got to weed through there pretty carefully. But when I fall way behind, so far behind that Google News searching the way I normally do when I'm up to speed, up to date on gun fail stories, either is useless or produces too many hits or just, doesn't reach everything. So I very often will cull through the Gun Violence Archive, unintentional shootings, and work from there as a database to backfill what I have missed. And so I was doing that for the week surrounding the date of February 14th, which was, of course, the date of the shooting in Parkland. And I very frequently find this to be the case when I'm gathering the stories myself in Google News, which, by the way, also the Google News interface has changed in the last year or so. It's been a while now. It makes it very much, I think, much more difficult for me to do the searching work that I was doing. It gives you a much more limited number of news hits than it used to. And I haven't yet found any way around that, and I should probably just be using some other search. But okay. Anyway, what I usually find is in the week surrounding the date of a major gun-related event, especially, a school shooting or something like that, the media spotlight on that event tends to blot out other gun-related events, not only from human memory, but from documentation in the news services, which doesn't make a great deal of sense, but for whatever reason, even the reporters' eyes are drawn to the big story, and even though their jobs are to cover the smaller local stories, I don't know. It seems to me that there is less coverage, perhaps, of more minor gun fails. Why cover, for instance, the fact that somebody forgot their gun in the bathroom at the local Hardee's when there's a national shooting story going on, right? So that's what worries me. I very frequently see a blotting effect, blotting out of other stories. And so the week of a major gun event, that week's gun fail compilation tends to come in low, the numbers of instances, which we should be happy about if it were really actually a low number happening. I suspect, however, that the number doesn't change very much, and if anything, it probably begins to increase after such an event as more people become paranoid and begin carrying guns around, even though they're not quite used to doing so. That's when we tend to see a spike in forgetting them in the bathrooms, etc. For instance, anyway, similar effect around the shooting in Parkland. A very low weekly total of gun fail instances. I think 19, which is the lowest I've ever found. And statistically speaking, just in terms of actual injuries, accidental shootings that result in injury reported to a local hospital, CDC data tends to indicate that we're only getting about 20 to 25% of the gun fail stories anyway. So I suspect we're missing out on a lot from that week. And one of the stories that was blotted out was this sort of relatively minor story as gun fail goes. But I thought I'd share it with you because I think it bears some relevance to what has come out of that shooting. Of course, I'm talking about the renewal of proposals to arm teachers in Florida and elsewhere. And they're moving ahead with it in Florida, which brings me to another topic, perhaps, that we'll get to. But here's the deal. Coconut Creek, Florida, also in Broward County, and I think Parkland is also in Broward County, as I recall from the stories in the last week or so. Coconut Creek is about, 7 miles from, the schools. There's about 7 miles, according to Google Maps, in between MSD High School, as we'll call it for short, and North Broward Preparatory School, which, do kids call it North Broward Prep for short, like we always used to? Not, talking about any preparatory school. So North Broward Prep is about 7 miles door to door between Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, the public high school in Parkland, and North Broward Prep. The very next day, the 15th of February, there was, like Pastor Dan is experiencing and like Scott is experiencing, there was a call about a potential shooter at North Broward Prep. And, of course, they would take this very seriously, usually. And in particular, the day after, I think cops everywhere were probably a little bit worried about the possibility of copycat crime. So here's the story. Coconut Creek, Florida, somebody reports that they've heard shots. As it turns out, the reports of hearing shots, at least when they called, was unfounded. They couldn't turn anything up. But there were shots fired at North Broward Prep, and so you begin to see that there's a problem developing here. A Broward Sheriff's Office deputy accidentally shot himself in the leg while responding to North Broward Prep. Here's the deal. Coconut Creek police officers also responded to the school after receiving reports of shots fired shortly after 9:30 a.m. Now, it wasn't the shot that he fired into his own leg that they heard, or they allegedly heard. They thought they heard something completely different. But, of course, what ends up happening? We heard the police screaming to get the kids out, to put your hands up and take us out. I was in the middle school office, a student identified only as Kaylee said. A local 10 News viewer, I'm looking at the local ABC affiliate's report on this here, said her friend, who was a librarian at the school, barricaded herself inside a bathroom with 9 students while the school was on lockdown before they were evacuated. So they went through the whole thing. The whole drill, I guess I would say, except for the fact that it wasn't a drill. They really thought there was a shooter in the school. Who heard what? I have no idea. But long story short, and I'll make it even longer after the break, I promise. The cops show up, and in the haste, the confusion, the excitement, one Broward County Sheriff's deputy officer accidentally shoots himself in the leg. So there was a school shooting the next day in Florida. It was the gun-adept deputy who came to protect everybody. Now, granted, he's not a teacher. Just good illustration, though, very quickly, of how hairy these situations can become. We'll talk a little bit more after the break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And hey, I got a note here that says monitoring the live streaming event that we put on each morning. And those of you who are listening live, hi, I know how many of you there are. How about that? I have total information awareness. I don't know who you are or where you are. 170 folks listening in live on the live stream, which is nice to know. And hi, everybody. There's lots of you. Are any of you Oscar winners? Is that why why the issue came up? Because I presented it that way? Well, maybe that's the case. Although it would be a little early for West Coasters, I guess, where a lot of Oscar winners probably are right now anyway, even if they're not normally based there. So welcome 170 Oscar winners. Why are you up so early? We're glad to have you. And let's see, you're obviously, no doubt, interested in finding out more about the sheriff's deputy from Broward County, Florida, who accidentally shot himself the day after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting. It's true. It's out there. I mean, there's not a great deal more that you would need to know about it, but just to sort of set the scene here, imagine this sort of thing happening without needing to wait for the police to show up and shoot themselves. Now teachers can get these text messages in class or hear it over the loudspeaker or what have you, or maybe they think they heard shots, and that would be an interesting question. I don't think this report has anything about who heard the shots. It's actually very unclear and a little unsettling, which is also another point to add to all this. We don't even know what could trigger the drawing and or use and or accidental discharge of these weapons in teacher hands. That's kind of why I thought it would be important to bring this up. And, of course, because of the blotting out effect that I was mentioning, very few people will be hearing this story, even in Broward County, Florida. To be honest, I doubt very much whether they spent more than a minute or so on this. And, I'm glad we're spending more time on it. Anyway, let's see. There was the librarian who barricaded herself inside of a bathroom with 9 students, which ordinarily would be problematic, right? You don't want the staff barricading themselves in bathrooms with students. But clearly she thought, I'm just saying it's the paranoia, which is real and warranted, and I guess therefore makes it not paranoia, is it's a dangerous thing. We're living in a dangerous situation here. And of course, it won't get any better so long as, the range of possible solutions doesn't include doing something about getting mass murder weapons off the street. But you go ahead and think it's video games or whatever. Okay, so back to the story. You got kids that are terrified. It's not fair. Something needs to be done. It breaks my heart. Student Rachel Harr said, Horr. You got to be careful with that last name. It's probably not really, her favorite thing. She's probably looking forward to changing it in the future. I don't know. Maybe she's used to it by now. 2 brothers who attend the school said teachers asked them not to get on their phones until the all clear was given. I'm not certain whether I know why that's a good policy, or is it a good policy? Or is it bad? Do you want to document these things? But the inclination is for kids to get on their phones. And I guess if you're trying to get them to follow directions that could be the difference between life and death, you're not going to want them distracted by tending to the phones. But okay, anyway, that's also an indication of the world we live in today. Here's the deal. We heard shots for a second. We heard one shot. And after that, it was just terrifying. We went in the classroom and waited it out, Nicholas Crate said. So here's where things get confusing. We heard shots or one shot. Did you actually hear a shot? Did you hear something you thought was a shot? Did you imagine a shot? Did you hear the cop shooting himself? Is it possible that there was a report of shots fired in the building that some people heard and some people didn't, and it wasn't until the deputy shows up that more people hear shots and the panic really begins, or what? I don't really know. And there's no way of avoiding panic in a school so close to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas the day after. I mean, it's on everybody's mind. If there's any noise at all that could be misinterpreted as a gunshot, that's going to send everybody into a panic. And, of course, there has to be police response. But, I'm just saying that if you actually add guns on site in the hands of teachers who may or may not really be trained, I know that the Florida legislature has a whole rigmarole that they're planning on putting teachers through. Whether or not they can actually execute that, I have no idea. I have some idea. I think the answer is no. But and our teachers won't be armed unless they go through this process. But who knows how closely they're paying attention? Who knows how effective the training is? Who knows whether it can do anything? And, of course, they wouldn't have been able to implement this training in between the shooting in Parkland the day before and now. But just imagine adding armed teachers to this situation. We don't even know if we heard gunshots. And there's people barricading themselves in bathrooms and deputies shooting themselves in the leg. This is not going to go very well, I don't think. That's the point of my bringing this up. I think you know that. All 170 of you know this. Hang on. There's more we can talk about, not just for this. But anyway, so this kid, Nicholas Crate, I think a kid, maybe it's not. Could be a teacher. They don't say. It's not great reporting. We heard shots for a second. We heard one shot. After that, it was terrifying. Went in the classroom, waited out. But that shot heard. Now, this is the reporter says that shot was actually from the deputy who discharged his gun, injuring his leg, Oglesby said. And I don't know that that's entirely clear. I don't know if it's accurate. Because there was at least some panic. The cops don't show up but for somebody saying they heard shots. It can't be that they heard the deputy shoot himself and then called the cops and the same deputy showed up, unless we're in one of those bizarro time travel movies. And I don't think we are. But if any of the 170 of you listening did win an Oscar, I'd like to option that script. So you and I can work on that together. Some parents still chose to pull their children out of class for the day following the scare. I'm sure it's hard to get back to work after hearing something like that, both for parents and kids. Oglesby said the initial report of shots being fired at the school was unfounded, but the second one wasn't. It was the deputy. My husband turned around and said, "Go get our kids." That following the parents choosing to pull their children out of class, right? Go get our kids. We're even talking about online schools. She says about her husband, you can't protect our children. Oh, that's Rachel's mom. It's remember Rachel Har? I don't know. How do you pronounce that? Anyway, Deborah Har, Rachel's mom, presumably cousin. I don't know. Doesn't say that they're parent and child, but I imagine that they were all together and that they were interviewed together on the scene, and that's how you got that. So that's it. Deborah says that they're thinking of sending or educating their kids, homeschooling them online because, as she says, this has been going on since Columbine, Sandy Hook. This is right around the corner. When, as a parent, can I feel safe for my child to go to school? It's not right. Well, it's not. But I hope you didn't vote for Trump, or at the very least, if you did, I hope that you'll let Trump have an earful from you, that this is something that's got to be done about, and the answer can't be, oh yeah, just take the guns without due process. Oh no, take no guns. I don't know. The guy can't flip-flop like that and get away with it, right? He's not going to be able to come up with a solution himself. You're going to have to come up with a solution and give it to him and tell him it's his idea. Then it'll maybe happen. Maybe he'll back it. I don't know whether it'll pass, but well, that's your only option out there. So that family had a lot to say about that. And by the way, where were they? My husband turned around and said, "Go get our kids." This was, I think, in the middle of the day. What was the timing on this? 9:30 a.m. So they're both still, home together? Do they work together? They work at a gun shop next door. I don't know what the story is. There's a lot of, this leaves me with a lot of questions, this setup. Anyway, I mentioned to you that there was more to talk about the guns in Florida. Something I set aside last week to follow up on from something that I think we talked about the week before last. That I was confused by the tweets from people that seemed otherwise reasonable, rational, and probably occupying similar political space to us, insisting that the whole armed teacher proposal was a distraction from something, that it was so ridiculous a proposal that it was obvious, I guess, to them that it was non-serious and it was meant to get us chasing after one other shiny object and therefore not focusing somehow on the rest of the gun issue or some other issue outside of the gun issue, although I've never really understood why discussing one aspect of a gun issue would be considered a distraction from the totality of that gun issue. But I guess it could be a distraction from Trump, Russia. But what are you going to do? People get shot. You're going to not look because Trump, Russia? I don't know. Anyway, that wasn't the part that bothered me. The part that bothered me was this assumption that the proposal was entirely non-serious and that therefore paying attention to it was somehow knuckling under to the gun nut agenda, since they were trying to distract us. And it was put in a way that made me think that people who were saying it, who seemed very savvy otherwise, didn't know or somehow discounted the fact that there are state legislatures currently considering such proposals, and that there are states, you know this, of course, from having listened to the show, that actually have such policies in place, most famously, for our purposes, Utah, because one, they've had it the longest, and two, they've actually had the most ridiculous sounding accident, including, of course, the teacher that shot herself in the leg and blew up the toilet in so doing, although We still don't know for sure whether she shot herself in the leg and caught the bullet or bullet fragments in the leg, or caught porcelain fragments from the exploding toilet. That's what makes it so fun to discuss. But okay, it seemed like, and I had seen several people say things like this, that these proposals were so deeply unserious as to be considered, it's even a distraction for me to discuss the distraction with others. And Daniel Dale, among others, noticed the same thing. And you know how much we love Daniel Dale, the Washington correspondent of the Toronto Star. He seems pretty on it, right? He tweeted when? Let's get the date. February 28th. So, a week. How far back is that? Anyway, he tweeted, I think this would be last week, that he said that there was a viral thread in the previous week about how the media was allegedly failing by taking the Arm the Teachers proposal seriously, rather than just calling it a laughably ridiculous distraction and moving on. But it's very real and needs to be covered as such, which, of course, that's what I said, but I'm not Daniel Dale, and you know how it goes. Lots of people say the same things because we're all pretty much like-minded individuals, particularly on Twitter, where we tend to follow one another because of that. And I don't know I do know now. I can see who he retweeted. I don't know where the rest of you, if you saw things like this. I didn't see this person say it. This is John Warner, who has a verified account that tells me nothing in particular, but the bio says, let's see, author of Tough Day for the Army, a blogger at Inside Higher Ed, an editor-at-large at McSweeney's, and a columnist for Chicago Tribune Books. So, relatively serious guy, right? And I guess Daniel Dale is retweeting and quoting him, saying, the question should be more along the lines of, this is ridiculous, right? You look like an idiot for going on national television and even suggesting such a thing. But no, it has to be discussed seriously. And this was one of several such threads. I really was puzzled by this and was glad to see Daniel Dale take note of the fact that this is real. And there was some discussion back and forth about whether or not, this was in fact a suggestion that to ignore it or whether it was something else. But yeah, the Florida legislature is actively discussing it. So is the Alabama state legislature. I think 8 states currently would permit, either by affirmative legislative action, armed teachers, or by, I guess, essentially neglect. They have never had any law in place that would prevent teachers who are concealed carriers from bringing their guns to school. That's actually the case in some number of states. Texas has got it, I think, most recently, and Arizona, and like I said, Alabama considering it, Florida considering it. It's being considered all over the place. It's quite serious, and they actually, it's a dumb idea, no doubt about that, and I think we're learning one of the reasons why by recounting this story of the North Broward prep. But they've got a whole actual program in place. And one of the stories around here somewhere I have put aside, they actually have put together a program that they're considering. I think the Florida state legislature has a program of the number of hours of training that are supposed to be necessary. And I think I would have to sort of scroll down my own Twitter feed at this point to try and find it. But I think they're talking 130 hours or something of training. And, many people who carry weapons for professional purposes, or military folks, police officers, did comment along the way, in order to stay sharp, essentially, so that your skills don't rust, you really have to be practicing with your gun all the time. Especially if you hope to be a crisis responder with your gun, you got to be not only, firing the gun all the time and working on your marksmanship, but you got to be doing specialized training about what it's like to shoot in a highly stressful situation where you might not be sure of your targets, et cetera, et cetera. It's an ongoing thing. You can't just practice and say, I'm done. Here we are. Eric Boehlert had tweeted yesterday that the Florida Armed Teachers Bill requires 130 plus hours of training, or 3 hours per week for nearly a year. I don't know whether they spread it out even. They might just say, if you can do it all at once, it's okay. I have no idea. But even if you spread it out, 3 hours a week for almost an entire year. And as he asks, how many teachers in Florida are actually going to do that? Probably about 10. It just doesn't seem like a viable option for very many teachers, which is maybe a good thing. But I don't know for sure because, again, my warning has to be, what if they just fake the certification at some point? A lot of people objected to that suggestion, saying teachers would never do that. Good teachers would never do that. And although it's unfair to say, well, no good teacher would ever consider carrying a gun in the classroom because that's a danger, a lot of teachers wouldn't. I'm sure there's some people that we would still consider good teachers and responsible gun owners who would consider this. The question is, would they be willing to put 130 hours of training into getting certified? And does it do you any good if you don't put that 130 years in year after year after year to stay sharp? If you really think you're going to arm teachers and be able to trust them to make correct gun usage decisions in such a highly charged situation, and it can be highly charged, as we learned from North Broward Prep, even if there's no shooter on hand. If you're going to trust them to do something like that, well, it seems to me like there's going to have to be ongoing high-level training. And even though Trump is offering bonuses, you're really talking about a full-time job, staying sharp as you should be with the gun. And nobody's going to be able to do that. Nobody's going to want to do that. Much less be able to. I don't know. I find the whole thing implausible, but we're going to need to discuss it because people are writing it down on paper and pretending it's for real. And pretty soon it's going to get even easier. And if it hasn't already happened, you can probably guess that ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, will draft such a bill, or maybe just even take Utah's law, scribble, their name on it and circulate the thing, and state after state will suddenly have one of those bills in the hopper. Whether they get considered and passed is a different question, but you can almost instantly drop a bill like that in 50 different state legislatures, and now suddenly it's pretty damn serious. State legislatures are full of wackos. They don't vet their people any better than we do, but in Congress, I have a state legislature too. Nobody knows who's in these things. You got no idea. You certainly aren't vetting people from other sections of this. A very small slice of political junkies pay any attention to who's in the state legislature. And it's difficult and it's a bizarro job because, like I said, people sneak by. The vetting isn't nearly what it is for members of Congress, and we have wackos there. I'm telling you, the closer the government gets to the people, which is supposed to be, people who argue for government devolution, and that the level of government closest to the people, whatever that's supposed to mean, should be the ones setting policy. That's also where all the wackos live. I can't understand exactly why that is, but it is. The closer the government to you, the less vetting people do in their voting for it. I guess they consider it to be less important somehow. I don't really know why that is, but and also there's the factor that 100 determined people can make a difference in a town council race, and that's all it takes. If you are a total wacko, but you got a small cadre of followers who are hardcore and will put up signs and go out there and ring doorbells and show up and vote for you, especially if it's like a 5-way race for a city council seat or something like that, guess what? You end up with wackos in government, and it happens at that level, I think, far more frequently than at the national level. which I guess is a good thing overall. All right, there's definitely more things that we can and should be catching up on. And as a matter of fact, now might be a good time to take a quick look at the abbreviated pundit roundup, as well as what's in pocket. Oh, look, I have a diary on the top of the recommended list. I did not even realize that. I knew I wrote it, and you knew I wrote it because I dictated it to you last week on the air, and then with Armando, and then I tweeted it, and then Susan read the tweet and said, "What are you doing? We have a blog. Why didn't you write this down in one place and publish it?" So I did, and it's the top recommended diary. How do you like that? It's the "Here's Where the Collusion Lives" story. That would be the one we discussed with Armando the day we read the tweets from NYC Southpaw regarding the Wired story regarding the CPM, the clicks per thousand or whatever it is, cost per thousand of the online advertising scheme in Facebook that ended up resulting in the extraordinarily cheap advertising rates on Facebook for the Trump campaign and comparably expensive rates for the Clinton gang, and how the dumber and more outrageous the ad, the more engaging it is, and so you were rewarded with even cheaper rates, etc. Yeah, so we finally laid that out and put it up, and I guess it was very popular. So thanks, everybody. Unless it's just the 170 of you gathered here in our intimate live circle here. I think that might be enough. All right, well, thanks. Anyway, I meant to read you the abbreviated pundit roundup instead, but I noticed off in the corner that, hey, that's my name. Look at that. Well, let's read what's under Greg's name here. This is I like this kickoff graphic here, tweeted by G. Elliott Morris. And I always look side-eyed at people who begin with a first initial. I know many fine people who do it, but it always makes me look at them funny. G. Elliott Morris is who? I don't know. It won't tell me, even though the tweet is embedded here. So I'll open the tweet and see. G. Elliott Morris, well, soon he's going to be a data journalist at The Economist. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Does he start next week? Who puts that in a bio? Soon, data journalist, The Economist. Election polling, political science blog. He maintains at thecrosstab.com. So obviously a polling guy. Past employment at Pew Research, Decision Desk HQ, and what's this? UT Austin. And then he is almost. This guy has a real temporal displacement problem here. Soon he's going to be a data journalist. He's almost a student at UT Austin, I imagine. Soon a graduate. Is that what that's supposed to mean? I've totally lost my train of thought. Greg, help. G. Elliott Morris. The G is for G. This guy has no idea what day it is. I've released a free ebook called Guide to Democratic Campaigning in 2018, which can be downloaded here. And he includes this graph, and it's a nice pie chart. And everyone loves pie. It says what the Democrats should say to flip control of the House. And it looks like it's about 90+% of the pie chart in blue here that corresponds to the message, Trump is bad. Now this tiny red wedge here is designated as Trump is bad, but in red. And I think that's clever enough to warrant a retweet, except where's the retweet button on this thing? How come this embedded thing, I got to go to the tweet itself in order to do that? All right, well, if you're listening live, I'll retweet it, maybe, if I can find the damn thing. Who knows when Greg saw it, and we'll all enjoy it. But if I do, there it is. Okay, if I can't find it, I figure I will make sure that at least that it is in the roundup. And in order to do that, I'll click on this, and then we'll have it. And housekeeping done. All right, that leaves me with the rest of the abbreviated pundit roundup. I'm not going to get through it if I abbreviate it this way. Josh Krashar, National Journal, always a red flag when Josh writes. GOP panic spreads to Pennsylvania. That is good news. Of course, we've been waiting for that. And that seems, I guess, probably driven by the Pittsburgh area special election here. Republicans have spent over $9 million In a blue-collar district, Trump carried by 20 points. If the GOP can't win there, they're in deep trouble. All right. Republicans are learning an uncomfortable reality about the political environment for 2018. Tax cuts, conservative culture war, staples, and even Nancy Pelosi herself probably won't be enough to overcome the deep hole that President Trump has put them in, because he's actually terrible. With the White House awash in scandal and struggling to articulate its agenda, the political mood has turned so grim. How grim has it turned? It's turned so grim that Republicans are in danger of losing an upcoming special election in the heart of Trump country. That's the lesson to draw from the surprisingly competitive campaign. Democrat Connor Lamb is running in a Pittsburgh area district. Trump easily carried by 20 points. When do we get that? That's been on our plate for the longest time here. It feels like, come on already with these special elections. About 100 of those of you listening know offhand when that one finally comes about. I guess I shouldn't take every story out of the abbreviated pundit roundup, because then Greg will be up against it on Wednesday, although by then there'll probably be new news. Let's see. We'll scroll down a little bit here. Let's see. David Frum writing again, although I always take David Frum with a grain of salt, but I have lots of salt. Trump repeats Nixon's folly. That does feel a little bit familiar, but it's a different front this time. Which folly is it? It's not the, repeat criminality and paranoia one. It's the trade war, actually. This president isn't the first to embrace a trade war to bolster his populist credentials, but in the end, it's ordinary people who will bear the cost. Were you thinking about that when you thought about Nixon's folly? Donald Trump is often compared to Richard Nixon in his disdain for law and ethics. True. The parallel applies to economics, too. Nixon in 1971 quit the Bretton Woods Agreement and imposed a surtax on all imports. The shock disrupted the world economy and profoundly angered formerly trusting friends already uneasy over the war in Vietnam. We're not at war in Vietnam, of course, at the moment, but that did unsettle Donald Trump in his time, too, didn't it? Wow, it all comes together. More after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Boy, one of these days, I'm really going to forget that this is just a 1-minute break. And on my to-do list for about 1,000 years now has been preparing a 1-minute version of this otherwise 2-minute break so that I can give myself cues from the music about, oh yes, right, this is going to end soon. And every day when I get off the air, it's like, last day of school. I just run out the door and throw my papers in the air, and it's very difficult to get me back and focused on production issues after that. All right. Let's see what else there is. Good. Here's some lead-ins to some other things that I put aside. Jack Schaefer at Politico. Not a favorite, but a pundit, and he's therefore being rounded up. Standing at the hole's unstable rim. The hole's unstable rim. And looking into the chasm is presidential son-in-law Jared Kushner. He needs to be in our news roundup today. He had a very bad week, suffering a humiliating downgrade from a top-secret clearance to one lower than the White House chief calligrapher. That is, I did see that reported. I don't know offhand why that would be the case, except why the chief calligrapher has a clearance at all. But actually, if you stop and think about it, the calligrapher would know early about the names on the guest list for things like a state dinner, I guess, right? So maybe you want to keep them quiet, but that is sort of humiliating sounding. But I imagine they know a thing or two, these White House chief calligraphers. The deputy calligraphers, not so much. Those guys are dumbasses. But that bad news wasn't the worst, although still a free man with no charges filed against him. And that is a good thing in the Kushner family, by the way. Jack, you could add that to your column. Kushner exudes legal liability, blithely mixing business interests with his role as an advisor to the President of the United States. Mueller will seize on Kushner's conflict of interest like signposts to guide his investigative voyage. I have to agree. Kushner has gotten himself in pretty deep. We did discuss, of course, the insanity of what he was doing. These just outright bribes that he was taking from people who were meeting with him in the White House. Oh, by the way, I did see this bit of detail get circulated. It's in pocket somewhere. Don't ask me to prove what I'm telling you. I swear to God, it's true. I don't know. I read somewhere that, remember the Apollo venture, was it a venture capital fund or a private equity fund that loaned him $100 and something thousand for his Chicago building? You remember, we discussed it last week. Interesting detail. One of the major backers of the Apollo fund is actually, I think, that Qatar sovereign wealth fund. So he's really squeezing them on both ends here. I'd be very curious to see this whole thing finally unraveled. Anyway, that would probably be a good jumping off point to, one, report on the news that I picked up last night from NBC News, and no doubt there have been some developments that I haven't been able to capture yet this morning, but it would be a big failure on our part if we didn't mention that Katie Tour and Alex Johnson were reporting late last night, early this morning. Special counsel wants documents on Trump and numerous campaign associates. I think this is the first of Mueller's subpoenas that touched rather directly on Trump. It's not a subpoena of Trump, but, well, I'll give you the story. The grand jury investigating alleged collusion between Russia and Donald Trump's presidential campaign. And here again, the fact that they're doing it from the grand jury standpoint is also somewhat interesting, although that's where I guess the subpoenas would come out from. The grand jury investigating collusion, alleged collusion, pardon me, actual pardon for me, please, between Russia and Donald Trump's presidential campaign has sent a witness, we don't know who, a subpoena, we don't know what, so we do, okay, seeking all documents involving the president and a host of his closest advisors, according to a copy of that subpoena reviewed by NBC News. According to the subpoena, which was sent to a witness by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, investigators want emails, text messages, work papers, phone logs, and other documents going back to November 1st, 2015. This is going to be an annoying subpoena. 4.5 months after Trump launched his campaign. Really, they could probably have gone back even further, but for whatever reason they didn't. The witness shared details of the subpoena on condition of anonymity. The news site Axios reported Sunday that a subpoena was sent to a witness last month. Okay, so it took some time. That's a long fuse on that leak. NBC News reported last week that Mueller's team is asking pointed questions about whether Trump knew about hacked emails from Hillary Clinton's campaign before the public found out. The subpoena indicates that Mueller may be focused not just on what Trump campaign aides knew and when they knew it, but also on what Trump himself knew. In addition to the president, the subpoena seeks documents that have anything to do with these current and former Trump associates. You can see how expansive this is, which may mean that it's, too broad to understand at this point. I don't know. But look at this list of names. Steve Bannon, who, of course, they note, left the White House as chief strategist in August. Michael Cohen, a personal lawyer for Trump who testified before congressional investigators in October. Rick Gates, Trump's former deputy campaign manager who pleaded guilty last month to conspiracy and lying to the FBI. Hope Hicks, they want to know how she does it, who resigned last week as Trump's communications director. I don't know if she's still there, or whether her resignation is effective yet. Anybody read anything about that? We've been focusing on the leaving, and that's it. Corey Lewandowski, everyone knows him, Trump's campaign manager until June 2016. Paul Manafort, of course, former Trump campaign manager and Gates' business partner who pleaded not guilty to money laundering. That's wrong. He is actually guilty of it, but that's not what he pled. Conspiracy and making false statements last week. Carter Page, a former Trump campaign aide / coffee boy / we don't know who he is, whatever. Keith Schiller, a former bodyguard for Trump who left as director of Oval Office operations in September. And Roger Stone, who is a goofy penguin lookalike from Batman and longtime Republican political operative and Trump campaign advisor whose sources have told NBC News is the focus of investigations or investigators interested in his contacts with WikiLeaks during the campaign and not interested in his kind of weirdo, swinger lifestyle. He's kind of an oddball, this guy. Once Hicks's resignation takes effect in the next few weeks. That answers that question. Cohen will be the only person listed in the subpoena who hasn't left the employment of Trump or the White House. And here's a correction. The headline on an earlier version of the story misstated the recipient of Mueller's subpoena. The subpoena seeking all documents involving Donald Trump and a host of his closest advisors was given to a witness, not the president himself. That would have been much more exciting, of course. The story itself was incorrect, and probably a big tip-off there would have been, give us all emails that you sent to yourself, although I sent emails to myself very frequently as well. Don't leave that out of your subpoenas, new practitioners. Mueller knows what he's doing, I think. But okay. I just thought I'd put that out there. Let's see. The Axios reporting on that from this morning. Or is it this morning? No, I guess it's also last night. Scoop, Mueller's hit list. Anything new on this? Aside from the list of names, does it tell us anything new? Not really, except they have a little scoop here. Bottom line, in December, the president's lawyer, Ty Cobb, he's still there, remember that guy? Told me, who's me? Jonathan Swan for Axios here. Ty Cobb told Jonathan Swan, the White House would be free of the Mueller investigation shortly after the first of the year, absent some unforeseen delay. I guess this must have been unforeseen to them. We know very little about what's keeping the investigators so busy, but the breadth of this subpoena means Mueller's team could easily stumble into goodies about Trump's inner circle, given so many people are coughing up material. Cobb didn't respond to a request for comment on this latest development, but damn interesting nonetheless. Let's see. Other things that we should point out. We can save this one for Greg, but Greg, in case he doesn't get to it on Wednesday, I'll let him go through the series of tweets, but just reminding everybody out there on Twitter that it's been a long time since Greg Dworkin called out Donald Trump as a chaos agent, and that, again, in a lot of headlines this week and inside the bodies of the stories as well, people just sort of coming to the realization that he's a chaos agent. Although, again, I think that's something that Trump once was told about himself, and it made his erratic behavior seem strategic, and he really liked it. So he tells people that he thrives on chaos. But, I mean, does Donald Trump thrive on anything? Look at him. Is he thriving? You tell me. He's orange, bags under his eyes. He's, 239 pounds or whatever. His degenerative brain disease that everybody is pretty sure he's suffering from is not doing him any favors. He was not that smart to begin with. And I don't know that, to look at me and say, well, I thrive on chaos. I'm like, well, I understand that you say that, but if what I'm seeing and experiencing here is thriving, one, I don't know if you know what thriving means, but two, if chaos is at the heart of it, that actually makes sense to me. You're falling apart physically and mentally. That's what I would ordinarily expect chaos to do to people. Maybe what you're thriving on is ordinarily people who are very together, who are around you either by choice or because they're investigating you or otherwise opposing you, who would ordinarily bury you because you're an incompetent boob, have instead to take their time and plod methodically along because of the chaos you sow. I think what you mean by thrive on chaos is that you're throwing off like metallic chaff behind you, like an electronic countermeasure of some sort in one of these high-tech planes. And everybody else, it's not that you thrive on chaos, it's that chaos causes problems for others. And the methodical approaches which would ordinarily allow them to roll you up and put you away within weeks now takes months or even years. It's not that you're thriving on chaos, it's that you're hurting everybody else with your chaos by comparison. And because you never really had anything going on physically, mentally, or business-wise, to be honest, it doesn't make any difference to you. What chaos has done for you is prevented you from making good on having been bequeathed $200 million to start. One of the early stories about Trump during the campaign, as we may recall from listening to the show since forever, or reading it elsewhere, that estimates were that Donald Trump should have been worth many billions of dollars more than he even claims to be worth now, had he simply just put all of his inheritance in some relatively stable investment vehicle and lived off dividends. But instead, of course, he went off and bought all sorts of things that flopped. And though he's been able to finagle himself a rich person's lifestyle out of this, there's some big questions about what his net worth really is. And that being the case, I guess, thriving on chaos, where the chaos is, I'm really worth a couple $100 million, which is nice. Don't get me wrong. But I tell people I'm worth billions, and then they loan me money, and then it takes them 10 years to get their money back. That's chaos for them. I guess in that sense, he thrives on chaos. Does that count? Here's some more chaos that he manages to thrive on from lying. Which report ought I to grab on this one? I have, I think, a couple of them. And let's see. There we are. The first one I saw, I think, was... I feel like there was maybe even one before this. But Yahoo Sports, I guess, had this news. And I have seen it followed up on since then. But I do feel like there's another one up here somewhere. But I guess not. Anyway, just to continue with the theme of using NYC Southpaw, he also tweeted a story from ESPN's timeline of this story. But let me grab this, the Yahoo Sports one here, because I think that one I might have seen first. Report: Donald Trump misled the public. Oh no. And why is it in UCLA? Why is it in the sports? Because UCLA basketball players. Donald Trump misled the public about freeing UCLA basketball players. Ben Rohrbach reports here for Yahoo Sports. You remember the situation when he went to China, and he claimed to have negotiated the freedom of a couple of UCLA basketball players who had been picked up on alleged shoplifting charges while in China, right? And he got into a Twitter war with the family of one of them because he thought they were insufficiently grateful to him for securing their release. And as I recall, he was very, he was bragging incredibly about it. It wasn't the State Department, it wasn't the Secretary of State, it wasn't so-and-so, it was me and only me who got these guys freed. You remember that? Well, here's the report. President Donald Trump wasn't entirely truthful. That's even a horrible hedge right there. About saving, and he didn't, imagine saving. He didn't do anything. About saving 3 UCLA basketball players stranded in China for shoplifting. According to a new ESPN report, and I guess that's the one Southpaw was talking about, 12 hours after being arrested for stealing sunglasses and beaded bracelets at Louis Vuitton and other stores in Hangzhou, China, UCLA freshman LiAngelo Ball, remember, and he got in a big fight with his dad, right? Trump did. Jalen Hill and Cody Riley were released on bail with their passports withheld after returning the items, according to ESPN's Arash Markazi. They were free to do as they pleased in the city as the situation was being resolved by UCLA and Pac-12 officials. How do you like that? With the help from Alibaba chairman Tsai and the Federation University Sports China. That's how they name it there in China. It's not my fault. 2 days later, on Friday, November 10th, the shoplifting charges against Ball, Hill, and Riley were dropped. The bail was returned. Passports released on one condition. The report said the players, now embroiled in reports of an international incident, were not permitted to leave for Los Angeles until Tuesday, a week after their arrest and 3 days after their UCLA teammates returned home. It was important for Chinese authorities that the players were left back for a couple of days after the rest of the team flew home. A UCLA source told ESPN, "We agreed not to say anything and not comment until they returned home." Seems like a decent deal, right? They wanted there to be some kind of punishment and avoid the perception that they had got off easy. Their flights were switched from Saturday night to Tuesday night, so they were going back home 72 hours after the rest of the team. So it wasn't like we found out Tuesday morning they were coming home that day. We knew that was already the plan Friday morning. Now, on Wednesday, November 15th, as the three players prepared to make their first public statements since the incident became global news, Trump, as he is wont to do, took to Twitter to make it about Trump. And, of course, his tweet, "Do you think the three UCLA basketball players will say thank you, President Trump? They were headed for 10 years in jail." He tweets at 10:11 a.m., presumably Eastern Time, November 15th, 2017. So again, these guys are already home. They have known since the previous week that they were coming home that day, and Trump inserts them into it. Do you think they'll say thank you? You were headed for 10 years in jail. They were free to go days ago. According to Trump, who was on an Asian tour at the time, he didn't contact Chinese President Xi Jinping about the players until Sunday, November 12th, after the situation had been reportedly resolved. So when White House Chief of Staff John Kelly called UCLA officials that day to tell them Trump was, quote, very optimistic that this would be taken care of in short order, the players already knew their fate. But of course, their deal with the Chinese government was don't say it. Very interesting. The situation was already resolved by the time we heard about Trump's involvement, a source told ESPN. That's not to take away from the fact that he got involved, but the players already had their passports back and their flights booked to go home Tuesday when General Kelly called the players. The players were encouraged to and did thank Trump, if only to not, quote, not create another story by not thanking him, unquote. ESPN reported. But LiAngelo's father, LeVar Ball, is not one to avoid stories. Days later, when he got in front of a microphone, LeVar said, when asked of Trump's involvement, "Who? What was he over there for? Don't tell me nothing. Everybody wants to make it seem like he helped me out." To which Trump responded, "Now that the three basketball players are out of China and saved from years in jail, LeVar Ball, the father of LiAngelo, is unaccepting of what I did for his son, and that shoplifting is no big deal. I should have left them in jail." But they were never in jail, not at any point at which you knew who they were or knew that there was an issue. And then, of course, followed up with, "Shoplifting is a very big deal in China, as it should be. 5 to 10 years in jail." I don't know if it should be that, but you're Donald Trump, so whatever. But not to Father LeVar. Should have gotten his son out during my next trip to China instead. China told them why they were released. Very ungrateful. Yeah, they did tell him why they were released. Nothing to do with this guy. Dodor didn't help you a bit. But please don't say anything. LeVar Ball, seizing the opportunity, doubled down, telling CNN, "If he helped, I would say thank you." And Trump upped the ante too. Of course, he can't help himself. It wasn't the White House. It wasn't the State Department. It wasn't Father LeVar's so-called people on the ground in China that got his son out of a long-term prison sentence. Now all caps. It was me. Too bad. LeVar is just a poor man's version of Don King, but without the hair. Just think. And there's actually more. LeVar, you could have spent the next 5 to 10 years during Thanksgiving with your son in China, but no NBA contract to support you. But remember, LeVar, shoplifting is not a little thing. It's a really big deal, especially in China. Ungrateful fool. Do you see how far invested in this Trump gets? And now we find out, and too late, there's no correcting the record at this point. You and I will know, people who read ESPN, and there's a lot of people reading their sports papers. Don't get me wrong, it's not that it isn't going to penetrate. It's just, you would think in a normal world, I guess maybe this is such a small thing that you don't want to bother the president of the United States with it in normal times. But look at this. Ungrateful fool, and should have spent in jail. He's going to be in prison. The guy was free to go. Free to go by the time you found out about it. And you're like, you got to lick my boot. This is unbelievable. This guy, I can't wait. I cannot wait for this guy to be gone forever. So there it is. There's our president demanding credit for accomplishing nothing. Nothing. And I got to tell you, China and Trump in the news again. Also, I don't even know if I put this one aside because I don't know what he was doing. I guess they had the gridiron dinner on Saturday. I didn't know because I don't care. I don't care that they have it. I know there's all kinds of analysis from media and media critics saying they should end the gridiron dinner, and I don't care. Go ahead. Sure. You know what? If I have to pick a side, go with the ending of the gridiron dinner. But it's long since ceased to serve any function. And in particular for Trump, I mean, I guess the idea that, well, the press, we get to spend some time joking and getting to know one another and some quality time out of the spotlight or whatever. Trump is pretty transparent about his feelings, and you don't need any kind of special event to figure out what's on his mind. He will tell you on Twitter every day. So, they may need this kind of intimacy with some future president. I don't know. I don't care. Maybe not. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of other opportunities. But okay, they had the gridiron dinner. He's supposed to tell jokes. He did. Some of them had a kernel of humor in them somewhere. Some of them were just terrible. And some of them made by other people were awful and should, be the end of anybody's public career except YOLO, LOL, nothing matters anymore. But I guess one of the comments that he made, and it wasn't immediately apparent when people first began gasping and wheezing and reeling from the comment, it wasn't entirely clear to me that it was made. And I'm still not sure that was it made at the gridiron dinner, where Trump, I guess at some point says, they have a really good deal over there in China. Xi Jinping, who I love, who's terrific, a fantastic president of China, he's now president for life over there, because that's, I guess, maybe sort of the way they occasionally do things over there in China. And he goes on a riff, and I guess in the spirit of the gridiron dinner says, we got to try that over here. We should give that a shot. In other words, I should be president for life, he now thinks. Now, I don't know how serious he was, and I don't know whether that was, again, it didn't even, this is how abnormal things are. It didn't even faze me enough to go and say, all right, I got to know, did he say that at the gridiron dinner? Because I would take that in a different way if he did. But with Trump, you're never even sure. I don't know. Maybe he's joking. Maybe he's not. I don't really care. I don't even think it's such a big deal, honestly, because effectively, if you ask me, I still feel like Donald Trump is going to be president for life. I mean, effectively speaking, he'll be president for his lifetime right up to the end of it, because I think he's going to die in office. I mean, I've said that enough times. I think keep eating that second and third scoop of ice cream. You will be president for life. I promise. It just won't work out the way you're thinking. You'll be president till you die, but we don't have to go out of our way to make you president for life, is what I'm saying. Okay, you just stay sedentary, and I think things might take care of themselves. Now, it could take forever. He could get reelected, and we could have to wait until 2024 before the guy finally drops dead. Well, but we don't have to change anything, is all I'm saying, to get around to making the guy president for life. All right, let's see. There's some other things here that we ought to look into. Trump and Kushner and all of the insanity surrounding them. And we're going to have to start, I think, calling out more names here. There's more people that we're going to have to add to our list of people to watch and names in the news. Before I move to that, though, I did want to grab one piece of information to pass on to you about another story we've already mentioned. The steel tariffs thing, I had mentioned to you that, this was ostensibly aimed at China in all this. Daniel Dale, once again, making another appearance in the show. Trump has been framing his steel decision as a response to China. This he tweeted on March first here, but I grabbed this one for our edification. Been framing his steel decision as a response to China. Per a report from his administration 2 months ago, China isn't even in the top 10 steel importers to the U.S. It's actually 11th. Canada, always number one. According to this report here, excerpted, and there's a nice pie chart here. Canada, Brazil, South Korea, Mexico, Russia, Turkey, Japan, Taiwan, Germany, and India all import more steel into the United States than China. Didn't know that. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So having left off with that tweet from Daniel Dale and the pie chart showing the various leading sources of imported steel to the United States, I didn't know that, and that's part of the problem. I mean, I think that I guess I would say what I didn't know was that China wasn't among the top 10. What would we say? Importers of steel or exporters of steel to the United States. I don't know why it's depending on how you frame it, obviously, from which direction you're importing or exporting, but top steel importers to the U.S. Okay. That's the framing they're using here in this tweet. I would have guessed that it was among the top 10. If you had asked me, does China do more steel trade than Canada with us, I probably would have guessed now Canada probably does more. Canada does more of everything. But would I have guessed Brazil, South Korea, Mexico, Russia, Turkey, Japan, Taiwan, Germany, and India all send more steel our way than China? Probably not. And that's probably what the president is depending on, to the extent that he's got any plan at all, for having people believe that there really was a China focus in imposing these steel tariffs. Of course, the fact that there isn't just means, or can't be, just means that Canada, Brazil, South Korea, Mexico, Russia, Turkey, Japan, Taiwan, Germany, and India will all be madder at us about this than China has a right to be, although who knows, you could get the Chinese riled up maybe more easily. By the way, it's a bit of an odd chart here. Out of the top 10 sources of steel here in the United States account for 78% of steel imports to the United States. So the 11th on the list, China, would be lower than India. India accounts in this pie chart for 2% of what would be here. 2% of the 78% of steel imports that come from the top 10 sources. It's a little confusing. But that just means that China is at or below, slightly below 2%. So they're in something like, I guess, 1.999% or less of the U.S. steel imports. And the rest of the world, aside from those 10, is responsible for 22% of steel imports, though. So there is something to be. I'm sure it's worth a lot, and I don't know how they measure it. It says percent of volume by dollars, by weight of the steel. I have no idea. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting, and also saw out there this morning Matt Iglesias had some things to say about this, and just generally saying the president's arguments about the tariffs are nonsensical, and they're going to end up having to defend these tariff proposals before the World Trade Organization, which has a court, for exactly this purpose. And He's just, what did he tweet this morning that caught my eye? When your tweets undermine the national security argument your administration is going to have to bring to the WTO. And this morning's anger tweets included, we have large trade deficits with Mexico and Canada. NAFTA, which is under renegotiation right now, has been a bad deal for USA. Massive relocation of companies and jobs. Tariffs on steel and aluminum will only come off if new and fair NAFTA agreement is signed. Also, Canada must treat our farmers much better. Highly restrictive. They're apologizing, I'm sure, to our farmers all the time. Highly restrictive. Mexico must do much more on stopping drugs, once again, from pouring into the U.S. They have not done what needs to be done. Millions of people addicted and dying. I don't know how many people are addicted to Mexican drugs, but, I guess we'll find out what he thinks at some point. Anyway, just found it interesting. Look for the tariffs to go the way of the travel ban, is what I wanted to say here. In United States courts, where they know that, they risk that you're not supposed to have any risk from displeasing the president, but this president is something of an idiot and a dictator and maybe will cause trouble for you if you decide the wrong way, in his view. But the WTO is not going to care one way or another. At least I don't think so. I'm sure there's some pressure that the United States can bring to bear. But my point is, his idiotic blurting out of policy ideas is like the the travel ban is, when reviewed by a sober court of competent jurisdiction, going to be found unfounded and illegal and unconstitutional in the case of the travel ban, largely, and obviously won't be unconstitutional with respect to the World Trade Organization with their tariffs, but they will rule them to be in violation of the agreement. And once again, he'll have blurted something out that he wanted to be policy, but he didn't check with anybody, and he just, once again, doesn't know this isn't really the way the world works. And he's going to find out the hard way, and he'll be complaining and insisting that all these people are out to get him, when in fact he just didn't do his homework and never will. Never will. So, expect more of the same. I just wanted to put that on your radar so that when it happens, we can all say, hey, I knew that, and I knew it because I was listening live, perhaps. 170 of you can claim this, to the Kagro in the Morning Show, where they told me this first. Okay, let's see. Like I said, we got to add some names to the roster here and round up some Kushner news. I don't even know how to organize this at this point. There's so much. Oh my God. Let me grab this. Saw this on Twitter, so you know it's true. I don't know. Jed Sugarman tweeted this. Who's that? He's a professor at Fordham Law School. Do you want to know what he teaches? It says here, torts, legal history, administrative law. How do you like that? So that's good. Here's what I was interested in. Not that. I mean, it's all very nice. Jed, fantastic. Keep on professing is what I'm saying. Qatari firm, he tweets, Qatari firm acquires Rosneft from Russia in December of 2016. This is just jumping straight into his timeline. Do you remember that was the case? Do you remember Rosneft, the Russian natural gas outfit, I think, right? Is that them, or is it the oil one, Rosneft? I can't remember anymore. But you remember that was the one that was up for, they were going to sell 19.5% of it. It got mentioned in the dossier. Carter Page was thought to be tangentially involved and all that. But we weren't sure who was going to be doing the buying of the 19.5% of Rosneft. And apparently Qatar, yes. I don't know whether it was necessarily the sovereign wealth fund that did it, but a Qatari firm acquires Rosneft from Russia. Kushner seeks money directly from Qatar. We've talked about that. But Qatar doesn't deliver to Kushner. Kushner, we did discuss this part, Kushner creates a crisis versus Qatar with a risk of war involved, right? The blockade. Then the Qatar-backed Apollo Group delivers $184 million to Kushner. Now, this is quoted from out of a Slate piece here, entitled, or at least the tweet about the piece is entitled here, "A series of revelations about Jared Kushner have added further," what? I better grab this, open this piece. Yes, and I did put the piece aside in Twitter. It's actually, the title is L'Affaire Kushner. A series of revelations about the White House princeling have added further credence to the claim of the Steele dossier. Now, let me just take a look at Jed's tweet stream here. Russia's Rosneft sale was the key to the Steele dossier quid pro quo allegation. In the summer of 2016, Russia offered payments from the sale in return for sanctions help. That's how we first came to know about it, remember? It seems Kushner may have arranged for Qatar to be the middleman, but then got cold feet as the conspiracy was exposed. The most terrifying step in this dossier-confirming story is how cold-bloodedly Kushner may have been pushing U.S. policy to the brink of a war in the Gulf in April of 2017 for such corrupt self-interest. And that claim is supported by the reporting of Ryan Grimm and Clayton Swisher, which we looked at the other day. Jared Kushner's real estate firm sought money directly from Qatar. And that was one that I felt like we had, it was reported as, new and breaking development, I guess, is how it felt the other day. And I felt like, didn't we talk about this on the show some months ago? I feel like we've already been there. Jed Sugarman continues, though, in case the Slate piece itself is too long and we don't get a chance to read it. He puts together a pretty good case here. For a law professor, right? The fourth tweet in his series here. This is not my hyperbole after the fact. The allegation of quid pro quo and pushing U.S. policy to the brink of a war in order to secure money for himself. Foreign Policy reported a march to war 2 months into the Gulf standoff that Kushner had been manipulating against Qatar behind the scenes, allegedly for his own greed. Remember those stories? And I think that's where we found out when we wanted to learn a little bit about the blockade story. Sugarman continues here. Shout out to journalists that I relied on for my Slate analysis. Oh, he's written L'Affaire Kushner. Natasha Bertrand, we've heard her name quite often. Julia Ainsley, whose name we have not called nearly as often. Jesse Drucker, Ben Protest, Kate Kelly, Ryan Grimm, Joshua Keating, Benjamin Whitties, Asha Rangappa, Tim O'Brien, who's this? Jacob Weisberg, Dahlia Lithwick, Jeremy Stahl. Great editing. So, excellent. Now he continues on here, just in case we don't get to the story. A colleague notes that the 19.5% in both the dossier's deal and Qatar's December 9th deal makes sense. Why 19.5? It seemed like such a weird coincidence. That must be the same 19.5% stake that we're talking about. It could, in fact, be that they were offering several 19.5% stakes out there. Why 19.5%, though? Because there's probably a 20% legal threshold rule for reporting financing and investors. These deal makers seem to be unusually focused on secrecy, evading regulators and prosecutors. In other words, they cap those deals at 19.5% in order to keep a lid on the type and amount of information that would otherwise have to be released to regulators about it. So very interesting. Let's see. How long is L'Affaire Kushner by Jed Sugarman? It appeared in Slate on March 2nd. It looks like a rather lengthy piece, but it's pretty amazing, really. And the whole timeline is laid out here. But I think I'm going to take advantage of the fact that the long story was made short by his tweet storm. There is one note at the bottom that looks to be of interest. One more thing. It says here at the bottom of, I'm sorry. That's their Slate fundraising pitch, which I'm sure is very important. And you should all subscribe or whatever it is that they're looking for you to do. Become a Slate Plus member. I support all the journalists out there. Support us first, of course, obviously. And you know how to do that. We've been pretty clear about that. And for those of you listening via podcast, we'll insert little reminders, which I really have to refresh at some point soon, so that you can participate in the show and participate in the support of the show. Bottom line, though, we'll read the bottom line conclusion from Sugarman's article here. The bottom line is that all this new Kushner news connects more dots in the Steele dossier's core allegation that there may have been a quid pro quo of Russian oil money, that's where all their money comes from anyway, for Trump policy change on sanctions. Not adoption, sanctions. There are still obviously a lot of loose and unknown threads here and no direct evidence yet that Russia is behind any of the Qatari deals. Depending on which dots Mueller is himself able to connect, however, the latest evidence would also strengthen any possible charges against Kushner and a slew of Trump officials. And we just heard a slew of Trump officials being named this morning in the story about the latest round of subpoenas, right? As well as any potential case of obstruction of justice against the president himself. Finally, there is still the even more alarming question about whether the Trump family business's conflicts of interest almost led the president to escalate a regional dispute to the brink of armed conflict. In light of the Steele dossier and how Qatar might implicate Russia, Kushner and Trump have even more to answer for. And word is out on the street that there are foreign countries signaling their willingness to talk to the Mueller investigators, which is kind of unusual. It's not really something we see all that often. Let me grab one more story to add to the mix here. Even though it's from the New York Times, and even though Maggie Haberman has part of the byline on this, along with Mark Mazzetti and David Kirkpatrick, it is still of some interest, and we will add it to our collection O dots for the day. Mueller's focus on advisor to Emirates, that is to say the United Arab Emirates, because we don't have any Emirates here in the United States, suggests broader investigation. And it does. And it involves an investigation of Nader. Can you believe that? Well, George Nader, not Ralph Nader, but interesting to remind everybody. I'm sure he'd be very pleased for us to bring up the fact that, yeah, I guess Nader is a Middle Eastern surname. Isn't he Lebanese, though? Not from the UAE. Anyway, George Nader, an advisor to the leader of the United Arab Emirates, has been questioned in the special counsel investigation, according to people with knowledge of that discussion. Here's a little bit of the story here. George Nader. Oh, he's Lebanese too. Oh, but he's an advisor to the UAE. Okay, so maybe Nader is just a Lebanese surname. It's difficult to tell sometimes the difference between Pan-Arabic surnames and Lebanese specific, or any other country for that matter. George Nader, a Lebanese-American businessman, has hovered on the fringes of international diplomacy for 3 decades, which has got to be pretty tiring, I think. He was a back-channel negotiator with Syria during the Clinton administration, reinvented himself, that's usually a good red flag, as an advisor to the de facto ruler of the United Arab Emirates, and last year was a frequent visitor to President Trump's White House. That is some kind of grift going on there. Mr. Nader is now a focus of the investigation by Robert Mueller, the special counsel. In recent weeks, Mr. Mueller's investigators have questioned Mr. Nader and have pressed witnesses for information about any possible attempts by the Emiratis to buy political influence by directing money to support Mr. Trump during the presidential campaign, according to people with knowledge of the discussions. The investigators have also asked about Mr. Nader's role in White House policymaking, those people said, suggesting that the special counsel investigation has broadened beyond Russia and Russian election meddling to include Emirati influence on the Trump administration. The focus on Mr. Nader could also prompt an examination of how money from multiple countries has flowed through and influenced Washington during the Trump era, which, again, would be an awfully exciting avenue, really, to pull at threads in and see what you can unravel. Just wanted to note that for the record. I don't think we're going to spend the time cutting all the way through this also rather lengthy piece here, but we should, I'll recommend it to you because we've mentioned a little bit of it on the air. We'll share it with you in the wrap up. We'll need to read it for background information. And of course it will only make your head spin, but I feel like we had to enter that name and that connection on the record in order to stay current about things. Other things that require mention. Here's a quickie that requires mentions. USA Today coming through on this one. I knew somebody would do this investigation, and I am jealous that it wasn't me, although I don't have the resources to do something like that. I wish I had suggested it to somebody. I thought this was fascinating. You remember the NRA getting furious about having Delta Airlines decide that they were going to terminate the discount that they offered NRA members. You know, like if you're an AARP member, and I think they make you be an AARP member, they just send you a card, whatever. But if you're a member, you know, they're member benefits. We've negotiated this fantastic thing. You can save 5% or 10%. I don't know what the deal is. When you fly on Delta, restrictions apply. You know, basically, I'm sure it was good for nothing. But Delta, post Parkland, decided we should be maybe more neutral on the issue of guns. I don't really know what motivated it. I don't know who pushed them for it. But now there's a whole corporate campaign on to get companies to drop their business associations with the NRA. And it's a good one, and it makes sense. It's a dumb association to make. And you'll find out how dumb it is in just a second. I mean, it's not dumb for the airlines considering what comes out of their pocket. It's just a dumb... Who cares? You're an NRA member? Big deal. Big whoop. Why do I have to incentivize anything for you? But they do it in the name of business partnerships. There's press releases that can be put out. It's a good thing. We're going to win some goodwill from some idiotic people. Fine. Right? And they ended it, and the Georgia legislature went crazy, and the lieutenant governor was grousing about it and making all sorts of threats. And so Georgia said, all right, in retaliation for Delta dropping the NRA discount, because we love the NRA because guns, and we're Republicans and we're tough guys and guns are awesome, so therefore we're mad, right? We are going to target a special tax break that we give to Delta because Delta maintains a gigantic travel hub at Atlanta. They're headquartered in Atlanta, right? So they're a huge employer in Georgia. And yeah, they get a lot of benefits from the state, special tax breaks. In this case, I think it was on jet fuel, right? They got a tax break there that keeps their hub in Atlanta, incentivizes keeping the hub in Atlanta. So they're going to punish Delta for this, right? So foolish to begin with, because major employer in Georgia now unhappy. Don't know that they're really going to leave. That's a pretty major undertaking, but other businesses aren't going to locate to Georgia if they know they're susceptible to that kind of blackmail. I don't think Amazon, for instance, really ever had any serious intention of locating its new East Coast headquarters in Georgia, but it's easy enough to say, you're out now. You'll be targeting us all the time. Who wants this kind of headache? So, anyway, we now found out what it's all over, right? What is all this? What's all the hubbub, bub? Do you know, USA Today looked into Bart Jansen picks up the phone and figures out, what is the number of Delta airline passengers who buy tickets with NRA discounts anyway? Since we're going to have this fight, don't you want to know that? And the answer is 13. I don't know over what period of time, but look at this. How many airline passengers does it take to kill a $40 million tax break for Delta Airlines? Only 13. The Georgia legislature removed a jet fuel tax break from a larger tax package Thursday. Lawmakers were upset that Delta, which is headquartered in Atlanta, dropped the National Rifle Association from a discount fare program in an effort to appear neutral on gun policy. After the firestorm, Delta will review all of its marketing programs, all of them, and to avoid those that might become political. CEO Ed Bastian announced Friday. But the airline said only 13 passengers ever bought tickets with an NRA discount. That translates into each discount costing the airline about $3 million in tax breaks. So really, I mean, I guess it's funny. This is being presented from the viewpoint of, and I guess economically it should be presented from the viewpoint of, maybe you should have kept the discount because you're going to lose $40 million in tax breaks for 13, to cut loose 13 customers. But of course, that's not the point. The point is, you shouldn't be offering it in the first place. But weird. 13 passengers in the whole history of this thing. We are in the process of a review to end group discounts for any group of a politically divisive nature. I think that's wise, Bastian said in a note to employees. The legislative fight played out against the Republican primary campaign to succeed Governor Nathan Deal, who supported the jet fuel tax break before it was removed. Lieutenant Governor Casey Kagro, which is I think the most stripper name like lieutenant governor in the country, probably. One of the primary candidates gained attention by tweeting on Monday that he would kill any tax breaks for Delta. He said just that. Of course, State Senator Michael Williams, a rival GOP candidate for governor, said Kagel only joined the fight after Senate Republicans agreed to block Delta's tax break anyway. So I did it first. I thought he was going to be the reasonable guy in this, but why would I think there was one of those? It's a Republican primary. He didn't have the gumption to say, I'm sure, he didn't have the gumption. Who knows? To say, he probably sounds like Jack Kingston, right? He's from Georgia. To say that until the Senate as a body, at least the Republican caucus, united and told him we weren't going to support it. Williams told Fox and Friends on Friday, we had to send a message that we're not going to support crony capitalism in Georgia. I mean, whatever. I mean, that's totally backwards, obviously. You don't have any right to fly for less because you're an NRA member. Frankly, I've spent a little bit of time over the weekend, and I'm going to continue to do it, I think. I decided I'm going to tweet out those pictures, those compilation pictures that I often use for gun fail. If you remember back that far. The TSA, Transportation, that's right. Transportation Security Administration, agency. Are they an agency or an administration? TSA, the people who search you at the airports, post weekly the number of guns that they find on passengers on their way through security checkpoints. You know about it. You leave it in your bag. It's in your coat pocket. You're actually trying to sneak it on a plane, whatever the reason is. They always say they forgot. I forgot I had a gun, which is reason enough not to allow you to have the gun. Most places you get the gun back because we love guns in this country. But whatever. Anyway, there's almost always, routinely, 50 plus people, in case you never heard me talk about it, who get caught trying to bring a gun through security, whether because they say they forgot it and whether they're telling the truth or not. And very recently, a couple of weeks ago, they broke the weekly record. I think that was 104 guns found at airports across the country. People, oops, I forgot I had a handheld instant death machine in my pocket. Sorry about that. The TSA is constantly finding these things and breaking the records year after year after year. It should cost more to fly if you are an NRA member. If they could price those tickets based on actuarial information, if you're a member of the NRA, the odds that you're costing us that much more money and time over at the TSA checkpoint are that much greater. It should cost more to fly as an NRA member, not less. I want to campaign for that. Let's raise the prices on these guys and keep the rest of us safe. All right. There's definitely much, much more to get to. I didn't get to all of it. We got to talk about what's going on in West Virginia. It's teachers' strike, but that would require me learning considerably more about it, though I did grab a piece or two. It's become a very interesting and exciting development there for a number of reasons, and it looks like it might even be something to spread to other states. The plight of teachers is pretty similar everywhere, and this may move other people to pick up the ball and move back and strike in their states. I think the West Virginia teachers are getting ready to come back to the classroom. I don't think they're going to stay out forever, but I mean, every school in West Virginia, every single school in West Virginia was closed for most, if not all, of last week, which is pretty amazing. And I think they were going to do it for one more day just to make a point today. I don't know whether they're coming back to the classroom, but we got to dive into that and figure out what's going on and give those people their due for the hard work that they're putting into this and consciousness raising that they are doing. Lots more on Trump and chaos theory that we can share during the week, and I'm sure Greg will want to bring us some of that. Lots more updates on exactly what the hell Kushner may or may not be doing, and of course, an excellent piece shared with us on guns and the nature, I guess, of what it takes to change politicians' minds on guns. I'm not going to share this one with you just yet in the roundup. I want to read it, I think, on the air, but just to tease you with a little bit more of what's coming up in the week to come, and I am sure that the subpoena game will only increase between now and subpoena day, Friday this week. Let me now shift gears and hand the microphone over to Justice Putnam so that he can bring you this Monday's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let me tell you a little bit about what he's got in store for you, too. Trump sure seems to know a lot for someone who says he's not colluding. That is amazing. The only thing he knows anything a lot about. What else have we got? A tiny Canadian village just beat a multi-million-dollar oil company in court. That sounds fun. And successfully protected the town's water supply. California's steel industry rips into Trump's damaging tariffs, and West Virginia teachers' strike stretches into a new week with no end in sight. So a better update coming from Justice if you hang on.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
How about what else he's got here? A sweeping new study that reveals taxpayers, not big pharma itself, have funded the research behind every new drug since 2010. And by condoning corruption and denouncing the press, Slovakia's government has created an atmosphere in which journalists have become targets for death. Not good. Stay tuned.